started. There are a few things that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to cover very briefly the exam, and I'll show you on Canvas what you have due this week and where to find all of the resources that you have for this next unit. And then we'll do a short lecture about the nervous system and the structure of the nervous system. So to start with your exam, I know that people had some technological issues and some Wi-Fi issues. So I went back through and I gave a curve so that the average became an 80. So of the 42 of you guys in this section, there were 23 people that got an A or a B. So I consider that to be a fine benchmark. I apologize again for the stress. I'm still thinking about and trying to figure out what to do for the next unit test, but we're just going to put that aside. That's not until the end of April. What is due this week? So let me go to Canvas here. Okay. So if you look on your Canvas, if you scroll down on the main menu, you'll see I put some different stuff up for the nervous system. So we've got a cranial worksheet, a glia worksheet, a nervous system quiz, and some nervous system videos. Break it down piece by piece. First, for the assignments that are coming up due here, we've got some discussion board questions that I want you guys to work on. Each week, I'll have another discussion board prompt. So this week's prompt is due Friday, April 3rd at midnight. There are some questions there that I want you to answer. You have a homework 5 coming up due April 15th. Okay. I need to put the dates on this. I did for the other section out for you guys. And then we have some worksheets that you guys are going to work on. A glia worksheet, that's going to be due April 10th, and a cranial nerve worksheet due the 22nd. So remind myself to date those worksheets. If you look at the discussion boards, again, each week you need to have 2 posts in a discussion board. 1 post in a things you found confusing or interesting for week 2. And then for this week, it's nervous system questions part 1. Okay. Are there any questions about what you're working on this week for that? The other thing I wanted to show you, go back to these videos, I wanted to show you what I put for the videos. Okay. So you have information on reflex arc. The most important videos are these about aphasias, fluent aphasia and non-fluent aphasia, which we'll get to, and I'll bring up again when we talk about parts of the brain, as well as a crash course playlist. Okay, there are no questions. I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint. Any questions about what is due this week? Discussion board, 2 posts in a discussion board. 1 is something I found interesting, confusing. 1 in the nervous system questions, and then start working on some of those worksheets. Okay, I'm going to switch gears then, and we're going to switch to the PowerPoint. So we are on chapter 7 now. Chapter 7 is about our nervous system. So the nervous system this is usually my favorite chapter to do with you guys. I'm a neuroscientist by training, so this is the area I find to be the most fun, and I'm the most bummed about not being in class with you to talk about it. But I'm around if you have any other questions about it to work on. So Chapter 7, the nervous system. We're going to talk about the organization of the nervous system. We'll talk about nervous tissue, its structure, and its function. And then we'll break into the central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is all the other nerves of your body. And then we'll end with the development of the nervous system and some diseases. So the learning objectives for our first part, we're going to list the general function of the nervous system, and then we'll define central versus peripheral and what part's going to each of them. So I want you to think for a minute about your nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, your nerves, and try to think about what the function of the system is. Why do we have brains? Why do we have spinal cords? Why do we have nerves? And the main reason that we have a nervous system is so that we can integrate all the stimuli that we get from the world. So right now you're sitting somewhere, you're looking at a screen, you're hearing background noises of my voice, You're smelling your coffee, you're feeling the desk under your fingers. You're getting all of this input from the world around you. You also have things happening inside of you, homeostatic events, digestive system and your muscles and all of these systems that we've talked about. And all of that information needs to be integrated. We need to decide what we're going to do with that information. And that is where your nervous system comes in. So information from the world around you is going to come through our sensory receptors. These are our senses, things like vision, smell, touch, and they're going to travel along an input pathway, a sensory input pathway, to the integration centers of our central nervous system, our brain and our spinal cord, usually our brain. And our brain is going to decide what we're going to do for that and send out a motor output that's going to have an effect on an effector. So for example, you're playing soccer and you see a ball coming towards you. You see that through the sensory receptors in your eyes and your retina specifically. It's going to send that input to your brain that says, hey, soccer ball is coming near me. You're going to then decide to kick the ball by sending a motor output to your leg to contract the muscles and kick. So the central nervous system and the nervous system in general takes in all of the information in the world around you, all the inputs you're getting, and decides what you're going to do with that information or how you're going to react. And so, again, we break this down even further. We have two parts of our nervous system. We've got a central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and then our peripheral nervous system, which is our cranial and our spinal nerve. And the central nervous system, while being complicated in the structure of the brain, is pretty simple in that it's just two parts. Whereas our peripheral nervous system, we can break down in a few different ways. So we can first break it down into two different branches, and each branch then can break down further. So starting with our peripheral nervous system, we have our sensory division, which we also call the afferent division. A for approaching. This is the information that's going to approach your central nervous system. And you can get somatic sensory fibers, things from your skin, from your skeletal muscles, from your joints, telling you about the world, about where your body is in space, what your muscles are doing. And you also get visceral sensory fibers, things from your internal organs. You're going to be integrating the stimuli from those as well. And all of that information is going to approach the brain and spinal cord in the afferent pathway. We also have the motor division, which is the efferent division, or the exiting, E for exiting division. And this one is what you do with that information. So if our sensory or our afferent division tells us what's happening, the efferent division is our response. And we can have two different kinds of responses. We can have voluntary or somatic responses. This is that soccer ball coming at you, you're going to choose to kick it. You're going to use your skeletal muscles, which are under voluntary control. Or you have the involuntary or autonomic division. Ball's coming at you, your heart rate starts speeding up because you're nervous about whether you're going to actually be able to kick the soccer ball or not, right? That is involuntary response. And so that's going to activate things like our cardiac and our smooth muscles, again, our involuntary muscles, and also your glands. And these can be into two different types, either a parasympathetic or a sympathetic effect. We will talk about that at the end of chapter 7. Okay, so true, false, these are answered on the quiz that is on Canvas that you guys have the whole unit to do. It's 12 questions. Again, I will make sure those dates are up to date for your section. So let's now move forward. Are there any questions about the organization of the nervous system? This would be where you put it in the chat feature. There's a few seconds to type something out. Okay, so moving forward, we're going to now talk about the tissue itself and how it's structured and what the function of the different types of nervous or the different cells in the nervous tissue. So our learning objectives here are to see the functions of neurons versus glia, to describe the general structure of a neuron, to detail the composition of gray versus white matter, to list the different types of sensory receptors that we have and describe how nerve impulses are transmitted, and finally to define a reflex arc. So we have two types of cells that make up our nervous system. We have neurons, which get all of the credit. Those are the ones that transmit the messages. They are the fully electrical ones. They are like the superheroes in the story. Whereas the glia are more like the sidekicks. They are considered support cells, but the neurons would not be able to function without the glia. So glia helps support and insulate and protect our neurons. And one of the overarching themes I want you to see here for chapter 7 is all of the different ways our body protects and supports our neurons. And the reason for that is that our neurons are very delicate and they're post-mitotic. Post-mitotic means that they can no longer undergo mitosis and they can't divide, so they can't replace themselves. So when you cut your skin, for example, your skin cells can undergo mitosis and fill in that gap. And so a cut to the skin is not that big of a deal. Whereas when your neurons are damaged or your neuron is broken, it can't divide. It can't undergo mitosis. This is why things like brain injuries and spinal cord injuries are such a big deal. So our bodies have many different ways, and we're going to uncover them throughout this chapter, of protecting and supporting our neurons. And one of the ways is through glia. So glia are our support cells. And we're going to talk about 6 different types of glia, 4 in our central nervous system and 2 in our peripheral nervous system. So starting in the central nervous system, we have astrocytes. Astrocytes help anchor neurons to our blood vessels. They provide nutrients, they maintain an ion balance, they help in repair, and they form something called the blood-brain barrier. So this is super important. Your brain is actually located in an area that's very distinctive from the rest of your body, and it's separated by this BBB, a blood-brain barrier. And what this does is it allows for a separate environment for your brain. So say you ingest a toxin. That toxin, by and large, would stay and affect your body, and it would have a hard time getting past the tight junctions that are in your blood-brain barrier. It's sealed off. And so this is another way that we help protect our brain and protect our neurons is through that force field, that blood-brain barrier. So astrocytes help form that. They also help anchor neurons to blood vessels. So you have blood vessels that are going to bring in nutrients, especially glucose. Your brain exclusively uses glucose as its nutrient source, as well as oxygen and other important ions. And the astrocytes are responsible for linking the neurons to that nutrient source. And they can also propagate signaling in the form of calcium waves. So they help take in extra calcium and hold it for the neurons when they need it. They can act as like a reservoir of calcium. And so astrocytes are very important support cells for the neurons in our central nervous system. In the central nervous system, you also have microglia, which are immune cells. So they scavenge around your central nervous system looking for invaders that they will then engulf and destroy. So they are the phagocytes that defend our central nervous system cells. The third type in our central nervous system are epidermal cells. So your brain is bathed in fluid. It's filled with cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. And there are holes in your brain called ventricles that are just full of this fluid. And what line those ventricles, what line those cavities, are these epidermal cells that have these cilia. And the cilia help move the fluid in a stereotypical pattern. So it doesn't just stay still, it moves around the different ventricles and then down the spinal cord. So the epidermal cells are glia cells that have cilia that help move the CSF in our ventricles and in our cavities. The last kind in the central nervous system are cells called oligodendrocytes. And oligodendrocytes are responsible for myelinating our neurons. If you guys have ever looked at a wire, usually you have a wire, it's a thin piece that conducts electricity. And around the middle, a lot of wires are insulated, so they have a plastic coating. And the function of insulation in electrical wires is to help keep that electricity in the wire and not have any of it leak out. And so this helps speed up the electrical signal. The same is true for myelin in neurons. So myelin is an insulating material that goes around the fiber of the neurons and helps keep the electricity in the fiber. In this case, electricity is moving ions. So it helps keep the ions from leaking out and maintain them in the fiber so they can send their signal down a long distance. In our central nervous system, this myelin is made by cells called oligodendrocytes. So again, think about why myelin is important. We need neurons to send signals, and we need them to send them fast. You have to send a signal, for example, to move your big toe. That signal comes all the way down your spinal cord, all the way down your leg. That is a long way to go, and that happens in an instant. And so myelin being insulating helps us speed up signals so that they can travel long distances very, very quickly. So myelin is important to help speed up signaling of our nervous system. In the peripheral nervous system, we have two types of fluid. We have satellite cells, which provide cushioning to our cell bodies, again, a protective role. And we have Schwann cells, which help myelinate the neurons in the peripheral nervous system. So Schwann cells do the same thing that oligodendrocytes do, but they do it specifically in the peripheral nervous system. So this is the glia worksheet I want you guys to work on today. It's found on Canvas, glia worksheet. You're going to list the major cell types, the function, and whether they're found in the CNS or the PNS, central nervous system or peripheral nervous system, respectively. Again, going back to myelin sheath. Myelin sheath is important because it speeds up the signals. It insulates the fiber. Again, central nervous system, we use oligodendrocytes. In the peripheral nervous system, we use Schwann cells. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is that there are going to be gaps in our myelin sheath. And they're named for the French scientists who discovered them. They're called nodes of Ranvier. And these nodes are areas that have all of the signaling molecules clustered together. And so the myelin sheath speeds up the signal mainly by insulating, but it also speeds up the signal because it clusters together the important signaling molecules so that they don't have to travel a long distance. They're all right there. So they can talk to each other, they can communicate via chemical signaling very, very quickly. The last thing we're going to talk about today is the structure of a neuron. So again, I said glia are kind of like the sidekicks. Neurons are the superheroes of the nervous system. They're the ones that transmit the message, they send out that electrical signal, and they have a very stereotypical shape to them. So they have a cell body, which holds the nucleus, most of the organelles, is considered the metabolic center. They also have two different types of processes. They have dendrites, which are going to receive signal from other nearby neurons that are then going to pass through the cell body and go down the axon. And the axon ends in an axon terminal. And the axon terminal will form a synapse or a connection with another nearby neuron, the dendrite of another nearby neuron. And this is what a stereotypical neuron looks like. You can tell that this is a peripheral nervous system neuron because it has Schwann cells forming the myelin sheath as opposed to oligodendrocytes. And this here is a motor neuron. So if we start at the top, something wrong. There we go. If we start at the top, we have dendrites, which are going to receive signal from nearby neurons, and they're going to send that signal to the cell body. The cell body, again, is the metabolic center. It's got the nucleus, it's got mitochondria. It's going to pass that signal down, starting at our axon. The axon starts at a region called the axon hillock, and the signal will move all the way down the axon until it reaches an axon terminal. Again, this neuron has Schwann cells forming myelin sheaths around the axon, and there are gaps in the myelin sheath that we call nodes of Ranvier. And this is where all of those signaling molecules responsible for transmitting that electrical message are gathered and clustered together. And so what happens to the electrical signal is it will jump from node to node to node. And this is how the neuron is able to signal very long distances very quickly, is because of that myelin sheath. Okay, that is where we're going to stop today. Let me unshare my PowerPoint here. Stop sharing. Okay, are there any questions about what you have due this week or about the material we covered for the first part of the nervous system? Once, twice. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.